This case will make you terrified to go back to school. This is the haunting case of the back-to-school killer. On the 17th of October 2009, students in Fairfax, Virginia were really excited to go and see their favourite band in concert, Metallica. 20-year-old Morgan Harrington was one of them. Morgan and her friends all went to the concert together, but during one of the opening band's performances at around 8 p.m, she left to go to the toilet. When she failed to return, her friends got really worried. They managed to ring Morgan, who told them that she'd accidentally ended up outside of the venue and security wouldn't let her back in. She reassured her friends that she would probably just try and get a lift home, and the concert went on. After the show, it was clear that nobody knew where Morgan was or could get hold of her, so they reported her missing. Police started hunting for her, and then they made a terrifying discovery. Her mobile phone was found in a nearby car park and the battery had been removed. This was obviously a huge red flag. Witnesses reported seeing Morgan that evening by a nearby taxi rank looking quite drunk. The band Metallica even helped out and did a video appeal for help from the public. Another worrying discovery was made in November when people found Morgan's t-shirt in bushes near the campus. The case seemed to grind to a halt until January 2010 when a local farmer tragically found Morgan's body on some of his land. The police at this point were also testing the DNA on Morgan's t-shirt. This showed that the DNA from an unknown person on the t-shirt was a match to somebody who had attacked somebody in Fairfax in 2005. However, police still didn't know who that person was, and Morgan's case went cold. That was until another hideous crime. In the early hours of September the 13th, 2014, 18-year-old Hannah Graham was lost in Charlottesville. She was a sophomore at the University of Virginia. She texted her friend to try and get some help after getting lost after attending an off-campus party. Similar to Morgan's case, when Hannah failed to turn up to class, she was reported missing. Luckily, Hannah was captured by quite a lot of CCTV. Horrifyingly though, in one of the pieces of footage, you can clearly see a man start to follow her. He was a very tall man with either braids or dreadlocks. Women around the same area that evening also reported seeing this man acting inappropriately with women. Earlier in the evening, he'd been asked to leave a bar because of this, and then the women noticed that this same man had his arm around the girl that we now know is Hannah. These girls decided to follow the pair as they just had a gut feeling that something was wrong. They actually tried to intervene and tell the man to back off from the drunk student, but he was quite intimidating. He actually ended up taking Hannah to another bar and buying her drinks. Later, other witnesses said that they saw Hannah by an orange car, apparently telling the driver that she was not going to get in the car. That was the last time she was seen alive. Police managed to identify the driver of the car and the man obviously who was following the student as 32-year-old Jesse Matthew Jr. Infuriatingly, over an 11-month period, he had actually been investigated for allegations of art at multiple universities. He was never prosecuted, and he was actually able to just simply leave those universities after each incident. Now, interestingly, Jesse actually drove a taxi. If you remember back to Morgan's case, she had disappeared while at a taxi rank. After being interviewed by police, Jesse frustratingly managed to get away. He sped out of the police station and escaped. He was plastered all over the news, and luckily a woman at a beach in Texas spotted him. She ended up calling police to report this, but they really didn't take her seriously at first, and she ended up having to call several times. After she literally had to beg them to show up, Jesse was eventually arrested. Police were able to link him to the attack in Fairfax in 2005 and also to Morgan's murder. A month later, Hannah's body was found just 5 miles from where Morgan was found. He was eventually sentenced to 3 life terms for the attack in 2005 and then given 4 life terms for the murders of Hannah and Morgan. In 2019, interestingly, he was actually diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and I can't seem to find an update as to whether he's still alive. Please take this case as a warning to be extra vigilant and always stay with your friends on nights out. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have to do this, but obviously women are vulnerable, so please do keep a lookout for anyone looking vulnerable and walking on their own. This teenager is accused of killing his ex, then sitting in a room with her corpse for hours. 18-year-old Natalie Martin was just like any other young girl, letting her hair down after graduating. She was recently on holiday celebrating with a group of her friends after graduating Philo High School in Duncan Falls, Ohio. They were staying at a rental home in South Carolina. Natalie's ex-boyfriend, 18-year-old Blake Linkus, was also there with the group. The pair had actually broken up in February this year, as apparently Blake had grown violent. On one occasion, he, quote, took her and threw her across the room. On June the 5th, the day before her death, Blake and Natalie had apparently been arguing because he found out she'd been texting someone else. On the fateful night in question, the group had been out clubbing when Natalie decided to go home because she felt unwell. Blake also went back with her. Around 9 a.m. the next morning, Blake came out of his room covered in blood. He was shouting that Natalie wasn't waking up. Blake had seemingly stabbed himself in the chest after killing Natalie. When two members of the group tried to attempt CPR on Natalie, they said it was way too late, she was cold and stiff. This suggests that she had been deceased for a long time and Blake had seemingly sat in the room with her corpse. Do not watch this video if you're home alone. This is the hideous story of the boy in the walls. Tina Bowen was living in Massachusetts. Tina's mum had sadly passed away, but Tina began hearing strange scratching noises from within her walls. She was convinced that it was her mum trying to communicate from the dead. The reality of the situation, though, is so much more horrifying. For weeks, Tina was haunted by cryptic messages scribbled into the walls of her home. Items would also mysteriously vanish and then reappear in a different place. She was convinced there was a poltergeist in the house. Then, one night in December 1986, Tina and her dad came home to a sight like that out of a horror film. A figure was stood in the wardrobe with a painted face, a ninja mask on, and a hatchet in his hand. The pair were then forced by this masked man into a bedroom. Luckily, at this point, he then went into another room, so this gave Tina the opportunity to run and call police. Officers raced to the scene and found that Daniel LaPlante had actually been living within the walls of Tina's house. He'd been there for weeks, taunting her. Now, Tina had actually dated Daniel, but she had no idea that he'd secretly been living in her house. However, this horrifying tale is far from over. Whilst out on bail, in December 1987, he actually broke into the house of a pregnant nursery teacher. This was Priscilla Gustafson. Daniel R.'d her and then shot her multiple times and then drowned both of her children. They were only 7 and 5 years old. Priscilla's body was found face down in her bed. Daniel was given 3 life sentences. These are the top 5 crazy cases of kidnap fakers. Number 5 is Carly Russell. Recently, Carly from Alabama hit the headlines after faking her own kidnap. She rang police and claimed that she'd seen a toddler on the side of the road, and she then seemingly vanished. As I'm sure you all know, the case caused worldwide panic, but just days later she showed up again and it turned out she'd faked the whole thing. Number 4 is Jessica Nordquist. Now, in July 2017, Jessica had started seeing a man called Mark Weeks. She got romantically involved with him, but when he ended the relationship, she just couldn't take no for an answer. She accused Mark of R and of getting her pregnant. She even bought a fake baby bump off Amazon to try and convince him that she was carrying his child. However, this failed to get Mark's attention, so she had to take things up a gear. She pretended she was kidnapped and sent distressing images of herself to Mark. She was posed tied up without any clothes on. Police obviously investigated this and went to her property. They found a random note stating that she'd been kidnapped, but eventually they tracked her down at a B&B in Scotland. She actually got 4.5 years in prison. Jonathan Davis is number 3. In February 2018, Jonathan vanished. His concerned family then started getting worrying text messages saying that he'd been kidnapped. The text demanded ransom money, and they even threatened that Jonathan would be hurt if they didn't act quickly. Shockingly, the family was sent a picture of what appeared to be Jonathan's broken finger. However, when police got involved, they figured out that if you typed in broken finger on Google, that was actually just the first random stock image that came up. Jonathan was soon tracked down by police where he was at a casino gambling. Number 2 is Hillary Black. In September 2018, Hillary from Georgia called the police. She told them that she'd been kidnapped while trying to get money out of a cash machine. She said a male had threatened her with a box cutter and forced her into a vehicle. She said they'd made her drive to a shopping centre. She also claimed that he had robbed her of $1,400 and attempted to R her. Police soon found out, however, that the shopping centre in question didn't actually exist. They also were able to get the CCTV of the cash machine and found out that she hadn't been threatened or forced into a car at all. She eventually confessed to just making it all up. And obviously at number 1, it had to be Sherry Papini. She allegedly vanished in November 2016 while out jogging. Her poor husband was beside himself with worry. However, to everyone's surprise, Sherry reappeared 3 weeks later. She was in an absolutely awful state. She was completely malnourished and battered. She had her hands in restraints, she had a shaved head, she was branded and even had a broken nose. She told police that she had been captured by 2 Hispanic women, but it was eventually discovered that she'd just been staying with her ex-boyfriend the whole time. Her husband obviously had no idea about all of this and was completely devastated. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and fined $300,000. Imagine being so angry at your co-workers that you feed them to pigs. Susan Monica from California was born as Stephen. After being honorably discharged from service in the Navy, she began living as a woman. In 1991, she bought a huge farm in Oregon and had a number of pigs and chickens. In 2013, she met Robert Haney. Now, they had an agreement that Robert would stay on the property while building a house on it from scratch. However, in December 2013, Robert's family were growing quite concerned. It had been around 2 months since they'd last heard from him, so they decided to head over to the farm to see what the matter was. Now, Monica greeted them when they arrived on the farm. She gave them the news that Robert had basically just up and left. However, his family were really concerned to see that Robert's trailer and his pet dog were actually just there on the farm. There was no way that he would just leave without taking his trailer and his dog. They filed a missing persons report, but it was very difficult for police to try and track Robert because he used to pay for everything in cash. All they knew is the last person to see him alive was Susan. However, during the investigation, police found that Susan's story just wasn't adding up. She told them a specific date that he'd apparently left the property. However, this didn't match with one transaction that the police were able to trace. He'd used the electronic benefits transfer card that he had at a nearby Walmart months after Susan claimed that he'd left the area. Police decided to search the property and made a hideous discovery. On the property, they found what they believed to be a severed human leg. When Susan was questioned, she changed her story again. She said that one day she'd randomly just found her pigs in a feeding frenzy. When she looked, she found out that they were eating Robert. She claimed that she shot him to put him out of his misery. However, when they questioned her further, she ended up eventually admitting that there was another body on her property. On the map of the farm, she drew an X and stated that that's where they would find Steve. Steve Delacino was a former employee of Susan's. He'd actually started working for her a year prior to Robert. According to Susan, one day she'd confronted Steve for stealing 2 of her guns. They ended up in a physical fight and apparently one of the guns went off and shot him. Now, neither of Susan's stories actually made sense. They didn't explain why both of the bodies were actually found hacked to pieces. She also kept changing her stories and neither of them matched with the forensic evidence found at the scene. Steve had also actually suffered 4 gunshot wounds to the head, not 1. Susan was eventually sentenced to a life in prison with the possibility of parole after a minimum of 50 years. These are the top 7 most shocking true crime documentaries. At number 7 is the Paradise Lost trilogy. To be honest, it shocked me right from the beginning with just showing the deceased victims at the crime scene. They were so young and it's just so awful to see them. It's incredibly harrowing, and the rest of the trilogy goes on to document just the absolute miscarriages of justice that happened. At number 6, Abducted in Plain Sight, which just had to make this list. The absolutely horrific abuse that the victim went through is obviously shocking enough, but also what I found really shocking was the parents' response. Those who have seen it know what I mean when I refer to the relationship that the parents had with the abuser. Also, just I recall like the mother having quite a weird smile on her face when she was like reminiscing about him. 5 is Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. This docuseries looks at Warren Jeffs and the FLDS. Themes of old men marrying teenagers, brainwashing vulnerable people, details of the horrible ranch that they were kept at. I feel like the most shocking thing about this, and a big trigger warning, is the tapes that they play. Basically, my mouth was on the floor. At number 4 is a lesser known documentary. It's the Life and Death Row series on BBC. Series 1, episode 2 is called Judgment. Now this one shocked me to my core. It follows the case of Guy Hines Jr., which if you don't know, I've done a YouTube video on. Now not only does it open by diving pretty much straight into a horrific mass homicide, it plays an incredibly disturbing 911 call from the scene. This was incredibly shocking, not just because of the intense nature of the hideous crime, but also just the blatant jury bias and complete incompetencies throughout the whole entire trial. Number 3 is Captive Audience, A Real American Horror Story. This one was absolutely fantastic. If you're not familiar of the case of Steven Stainer, I advise that you don't research it prior to watching this. I went into it pretty much blind and I was just blown away by this case and cases. It's a 3-part series that at first just seems like it's a story about a missing child. Things then just escalate and escalate. It's one of those where you feel like it's going in a certain direction and then it surprises you, and then there's like, it's gonna be all good and then it's all horrific again. The whole thing spans over 2 decades, and just when I thought things were coming to a resolution, things are flipped on their head again. Number 2 had to be The Jinx. I'm not going to spoil it, but it follows the case of Robert Durst and things that he is accused of doing. All I'm going to say is that it ends on a very shocking note. And my controversial number 1 is Evil Genius. This one just shocked me the most. I was not expecting in the slightest to see the footage that they showed. It truly did scar me for a long time. I also just think that the whole crime itself was really elaborate and shocking in that sense too. But yeah, this one, the footage just left me speechless. This man killed his neighbour over a mailbox dispute. In Indiana during September 2021, 2 neighbours had been arguing. 58-year-old Randy Small and 70-year-old Robert Adair both lived on a patch of land that included 4 houses. There was animosity between the pair relating to a mailbox that Robert owned on a patch of land that Randy considered to be his. On the 15th of September 2021, things reached breaking point. While the actual sequence of events is unclear, 10 hours after being killed, Robert's body was discovered in his vehicle. He still had his foot on the brake and apparently had his hands peacefully in his lap. An hour-long standoff between Randy and authorities had taken place just prior to them making that grim discovery. Randy claimed self-defense in court, but this was obviously not the case and he was sentenced to 60 years in prison. A sheriff's deputy is accused of killing his wife. Police in Oklahoma filmed 41-year-old deputy Vaughn Cannon crawling from his bedroom in hysterics after shooting his wife Jordan dead in an argument. Police had been called to the home of the couple at around 2 a.m. It had been rang in as a domestic disturbance in Brookstone Lake Drive. Bodycam footage that you can find on Google captured the moment the officers arrived at the bedroom door. Vaughn was seen crying next to the body of his wife, also a deputy, Jordan Cannon. It transpired that there had been a heated argument and Vaughn allegedly shot his wife dead. It's believed that Jordan has a 17-year-old and 2 stepchildren. The sheriff's office say that they are all heartbroken at the events. Vaughn has been arrested and charged with murder. The murder victim remained unidentified for decades until a breakthrough in the case revealed a potential serial killer. In July 1974, on a Provincetown, Massachusetts beach, mutilated human remains were found. The victim had no clothes and was lying on a beach blanket at Race Point Beach. Terrifyingly, her hands were missing and her skull had been crushed. For years, the woman remained unidentified. Presumably, the removal of her hands may have been to make identifying the victim a lot harder. For years, she's only been known as the Lady of the Dunes. Then, in October 2022, a breakthrough. Authorities revealed that they had finally identified the unknown woman. We now know she was Ruth Terry of Tennessee. She was just 37 when she was murdered. Recently, another announcement was made. Her husband, Guy Moldavin, was named as her killer. The pair had got married the same year she was killed. They'd actually been on their honeymoon that year and Guy had returned home alone. He told her family that they'd had a fight and she'd left. He claimed he just never heard from her again. Now, Guy actually died in 2000, aged 78, after a long illness. However, we've since learned some fascinating details. Police later learned that he was also wanted in connection with the disappearance of one of his several wives. This was Manzanita Means and her 18-year-old daughter Dolores. This dated back to 1960, 14 years prior to Ruth's murder. Shockingly, their mutilated bodies were also discovered. They had been found in a septic tank at their home, and although he was charged with unlawful flight after fleeing, he was never charged with their murders. He was later also wanted by Seattle police for fraud after obtaining $10,000 from another wife's stepmom. This woman is every parent's worst nightmare. This is the case of the babysitter from hell. It was February 1980 and the Johnson family needed a babysitter. They had a 2-year-old called Cassidy and set about looking for someone to take care of her. They'd previously used a woman called Christine Falling before, so reached out for her again to babysit. Now on the night in question, when the Johnsons got home, Christine told them some terrible news. Cassidy had become unwell and fallen out of her cot. They rushed the child to hospital, but unfortunately Cassidy would tragically pass away. Her cause of death was ruled as encephalitis or brain inflammation. Now, 2 doctors had opposing opinions on the death. One said that they felt that it was a death of natural causes, but the second doctor passed on their suspicions to police. Police did interview Christine, but they found no evidence of foul play, so she was released. She ended up moving to Florida just weeks later. In May 1980, in Lakeland, Florida, emergency services received a call. A 4-year-old boy had stopped breathing. Tragically, paramedics were unable to save little Jeffrey Davis, who was being babysat by Christine. The death was listed as a result of a viral infection. 3 days later, 2-year-old Joseph Spring, the cousin of deceased little Jeffrey, was in need of a babysitter. His parents needed someone to look after him while they attended Jeffrey's funeral. In a shocking turn of events, Joseph passed away that day as a result of the same viral infection. The year after this, Christine moved to Perry. She ended up getting a job as a housekeeper for 77-year-old William Swindle. Now, on her first day on the job, she told emergency services that she found him collapsed and unresponsive on the kitchen floor. He was pronounced dead in hospital and an autopsy wasn't done. He was just believed to have simply died from a heart attack. By this point, Christine had experienced an awful lot of death in her various employments. A few weeks later, she ended up going to a vaccination appointment with her stepsister. Her stepsister's little girl was due to go and get her jabs. The appointment went absolutely fine, but then on the way back, they stopped at the shops to get some nappies, and Christine actually offered to stay in the car to watch the child while her stepsister hopped out. Shockingly, when she returned to the car, the little girl had stopped breathing. She was pronounced dead at the hospital and the death was thought to be a reaction to the vaccines. In June 1982, Christine was once again babysitting. This time it was for 9-week-old Travis Cook. As with most of the children in her care, Travis suddenly experienced respiratory distress. He ended up spending a week in hospital, but luckily survived and came home. However, Travis's parents, tragically completely unaware of Christine's role in their son's illness, asked Christine to babysit once again. When the parents returned home, this time, according to Christine, Travis had suddenly died. However, luckily an autopsy was done and showed that Travis died from suffocation. Immediately, Christine was arrested and began to admit to her crimes. Christine's upbringing was thought to be unstable. She was epileptic, she suffered from learning disabilities and also suffered with seizures. She would display fits of anger and, trigger warning here, relating to animals. She had a fascination with torturing cats. She was apparently subjected to physical and abuse growing up. It's reported that while growing up she displayed symptoms of Munchausen syndrome, where someone will fake their own illnesses essentially. She claimed that she learned how to suffocate via the TV and claimed to have heard voices telling her to kill. In 1982, she got 2 life sentences. She later admitted to killing William Swindle too and was denied parole, and as far as I can see, she remains behind bars. A 16-year-old has been killed after an argument over McDonald's sweet and sour sauce. On the 27th of August, police responded to a call of a 16-year-old girl being treated in hospital for stab wounds. The teenager Naima Ligon from Maryland then sadly passed away from her injuries. It's believed that the fatal stabbing took place outside of a McDonald's in Washington, D.C. A detective announced that the stabbing occurred after a dispute over sweet and sour sauce between 3 girls outside of the restaurant. It's believed that they were all part of a group that had been to a party previously. Naima and another girl had apparently been assaulting the other teenager first, and she didn't appear to fight back. However, when the pair tried to get into a vehicle, it's believed that the other girl came at Naima with a knife. The girl was charged with second-degree murder, and they have found the murder weapon. This man from Minnesota faces murder charges after allegedly breaking into his aunt and uncle's house and killing his uncle. On the 24th of August, police got a harrowing 911 call. It stated that the person needed help as there was somebody inside their house. The terrified woman explained that her and her husband had been asleep in bed when an intruder had come in and started beating them with an object. 72-year-old Pamela Novak had been beaten and pushed down the stairs when she managed to make the 911 call. She identified her nephew, 44-year-old Adam Roaring, as the attacker. Police obviously raced to the scene and they found Pamela and Mark with stab wounds and blunt force injuries. They saw a man fleeing the scene and promptly arrested him. He had a metal bar and part of another blood-covered weapon. The couple was rushed to hospital, but tragically Mark passed away. Pamela remains hospitalized with extensive injuries. Adam's defense is that he had gone to his aunt and uncle's house in the middle of the night to return something and found an intruder there. A husband who posted about his missing wife on Facebook is now charged with her murder. Matthew Perry had posted about his missing wife on Facebook. 20-year-old Avriel Hooks had last been seen by her family on the 22nd of August. She was reported missing the following day. The pair actually have a 5-month-old son together. It's believed that prior to her going missing, the couple had split. Matthew posted on Facebook, "If you know how much I love my wife and son, you would understand how hurt I am. I'm constantly searching and looking everywhere for my wife. I'm not okay. This is the mother of my child. I'm lost." He also posted, "My wife is missing. I'm not okay, yo. The police questioned me for 5 hours and held me for 12. I need any information you can give. I'm a husband and a father. She's my wife and the mother of my child. We miss her." Police had become suspicious of Matthew when, during his wife being missing, he suddenly stopped communicating with her family. Avriel's mum, Ashley, received a text from her daughter's phone the day she went missing. However, Ashley does not believe that this text was of her daughter. The text said that she needed some me time and she was at a friend's house, which Ashley stated is just not the way she normally talks. On August the 29th, tragically a body was found in a wooded area. This has been identified as the missing woman, and a cause of death is not currently known. Matthew has been arrested on charges of second-degree murder and unlawful disposal of a dead body. Imagine finding out that your ex was trying to pay to have you killed. 42-year-old Tatiana Remley from California is accused of trying to have her estranged husband killed. The pair actually got married in 2011 and are said to have had a turbulent relationship involving splitting up and getting back together several times. It's alleged that the woman tried on multiple occasions to hire hitmen to kill Mark Remley and ended up meeting up with an undercover police officer last month. The police began an investigation into suspicious activity when there was a house fire at the ranch that belonged to her and her husband Mark. Mark claims that his ex intentionally started the fire after he found out that she was planning to kill him in early July. She states that although she was there at the ranch at the time of the fire with a friend, she does not know how the fire started. Mark was told by a mutual friend that Tatiana approached him and offered him $2 million to kill Mark. This prompted officers to set up a sting operation. In a meet-up at a Starbucks with an undercover officer that Tatiana believed to be a hitman, she allegedly, quote, provided detailed information on how she wanted her husband killed and his body disposed of. She's currently being held in jail and is charged with solicitation of murder and 2 weapons charges, and she's pleading not guilty. This is the mystery of the honeymoon cruise disappearance. On June the 25th, 2005, George Smith married Jennifer Hagel in Newport, Massachusetts. To onlookers, the pair were a match made in heaven. Jennifer had just landed a great teaching job and the pair were planning on going on a Mediterranean cruise to celebrate. However, it would be the last trip that the couple would ever go on. At the start of the cruise, they got quite friendly with the Askin family. The family consisted of a podiatrist and his wife and their 3 grown-up children. The oldest of the children was Josh Askin, and he was 20 years old and had smuggled some banned absinthe on board. Now, the ship headed to Mykonos on July the 4th, and after a great day, George and Jennifer went to a romantic meal on board. Then they did some gambling in the casino. Now, George and/or Jennifer were apparently heard bragging about having stacks of cash in their cabin. Witnesses recalled hearing them say that they had somewhere between about $15,000 to $20,000. It's not clear whether this was true or an exaggeration, but this was definitely the impression that people had on board. In the early hours of the 5th of July, the Smiths met 3 men. These were known as the Russians, who consisted of Gregory, Zachary, and Rusty. The Russians began hanging out with Josh, and by all accounts, they started behaving quite badly. They were drinking and smoking, and security had to be called. At 1:24 a.m, it's reported that the Russians were actually being quite verbally abusive to the room service operator. Now, security was called again, and the room service operator was advised not to answer the phone if they'd phoned her again. The Russians then went back to the casino, and Jennifer ended up playing poker with one of them, and then Josh and George left for Josh's cabin to drink the absinthe. Later in the evening, George, Jennifer, Josh and the Russians all went together up to the disco. By that point, the casino had closed, and a casino supervisor named Lloyd Botha joined them and apparently was being quite flirty with Jennifer. At around 3:30 a.m, George and Jennifer got into an argument. Witnesses reported hearing him call her a derogatory name, and then she kicked out at him and left alone. Now, Akalina at this point noticed that she seemed to be in a bad way, and she'd actually smacked her head on the wall. She ended up not being able to find her cabin and passing out in one of the corridors. At this point, George stayed at the disco for 15 more minutes and then went back to his cabin. The Russians and Josh went with him. Now, when they realised that Jennifer wasn't there, they all kind of collectively tried to look for her for a little bit, couldn't find her, and then went back to the cabin. The Russians claimed that they put George to bed and even took his shoes off. Apparently by this point he was completely passed out. They then claimed that they went back to their cabin and ordered room service. Now, Josh claimed that he went to the bathroom while the Russians were putting George to bed. In his statements, it was as if he was making quite a big deal out of this going to the bathroom. Some have argued that he may have been giving himself kind of an alibi as to not having seen what really went on. An ear witness claimed hearing loud yelling coming from the room and arguing between several males. He apparently looked out of the room and saw 3 males leave. However, we know that there was a group of 4, so what happened to the 4th male? The ear witness then interestingly heard what sounded like furniture being dragged about and picked up and dropped. Another ear witness stated it sounded like somebody was throwing things against the wall or against the floor. At about 4:25 a.m, several passengers heard a horrific thud. Security responding to noise complaints tried to get into the cabin but heard nothing, so left. Around a similar time, a plumber found Jennifer passed out in the hallway on deck 9. Members of staff ended up helping her and got her back to her cabin at 4:50 a.m. As you might remember from just a second ago, Josh and the Russians said that they went down to a cabin and supposedly ordered room service. Now, interestingly, they took a picture of their meal and they considered this to be their alibi, but there is potential that the timestamp on the picture could have been faked. There was also no written record of orders written down or delivered from their room. Obviously, we know from the drama earlier that the room service operator was aware that if the men rang again, then they were just to ignore them. So on July the 5th, it became apparent that George was missing, and at 7:30 a.m, passengers woke to a huge blood stain on the metal canopy. Now, frustratingly, apparently the members of staff on the boat actually just wiped this away. It appeared to everyone that George had gone overboard. Police started an investigation and they also found a small amount of blood on George and Jennifer's sheets. The blood ended up being George's. When questioned by police, Josh was very quick to try and implicate Lloyd, who'd been flirting with Jennifer. George's mum also became very suspicious of Jennifer when she refused to talk about what happened that night. However, this may be just a response to obviously very traumatic situation that had gone on, and theories about the case explore the possibility that Jennifer may have been drugged. Very interestingly, 15 years after George was lost at sea, Greg Rosenberg, one of the Russians, was murdered on his doorstep by an unknown perpetrator or perpetrators. Could this have been linked to George's death? Maybe he was involved in some way or saw something he shouldn't have. The case is still currently unsolved, and the Smith family is offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible. That 70s show actor Danny Masterson has got 30 years in prison for R-ing women. Most allegations against Danny came to light in March 2017. It was confirmed that an investigation had begun into SA involving the actor. Danny was removed from the Netflix show The Ranch and was dropped by his talent agency. He was charged in 2020 with forcibly R-ing 3 women in separate incidents between 2001 and 2003. He pleaded not guilty to 3 charges in January 2021. All of the crimes are believed to have taken place in his home. He was initially tried for the allegations in late 2022, but this was a mistrial and he was retried. He's now been found guilty and has been sentenced to 30 years to life. This man accidentally recorded himself murdering a man on a voicemail. 33-year-old Cody Wade from Indiana has just been sentenced to 85 years in prison. On June the 18th, 2020, Cody left a barbecue and walked to his mother's house. He apparently stopped off at a man's house en route, telling him he was just about to kill someone. He then stabbed his own stepdad, 53-year-old Carl Haviland, 4 times. The shocking incident actually took place in front of his own horrified mother. He may have actually gotten away with this if it wasn't for leaving a voicemail for his mum just prior. He accidentally failed to hang the voicemail up and therefore recorded the entire brutal attack via phone. At the time of the incident, he was already on parole for arson. One attorney said that this man is one of the most dangerous criminals ever. This case is absolutely horrendous. Mary Sisk was about to start a PhD. She had 4 young children with her husband John, and their family was excited to meet 6-month-old baby Colson. However, tragically, the first time their family would meet the little baby was when he was in a casket. 14-year-old Mason Sisk lived in the family home along with the siblings aged 6, 4 and 6 months. John was Mason's dad and Mary was his stepmom. Mason took a dislike to Mary, however, and once even attempted to poison her. He knew she had a severe peanut allergy and he attempted to lace her drink with peanut. That having failed, on September the 2nd, 2019, the unthinkable happened. A hideous massacre would take the lives of all but one family member. Gunshots could be heard as Mason callously shot all of the family members as they slept in their beds. When asked what the motive for the killing was, he stated, "They argue a lot and I got fed up with it." The judge wrote that the crime was ghastly, disturbing and draped in unmitigated evil. Now 18 years old, Mason has been sentenced to life in prison. There's been new developments in a case that is extremely tragic. On Christmas Eve 1984 in New Jersey, 2 boys were in the local woods. They discovered something that would no doubt haunt them for the rest of their lives. Wrapped up in a plastic bag was a newborn baby deceased. The bag was wrapped in a towel and the baby still had its umbilical cord attached. Police named the little girl Baby Mary. Now, it's long remained a mystery what actually happened leading up to this. Now, a woman from South Carolina is facing manslaughter charges for the crime that happened nearly 40 years ago. The woman's actually not been named due to being 17 at the time of the baby's death. Thanks to DNA technology, the woman was identified as the mother of the child this year. She's now been formally charged. It's also been discovered that the father of the baby was 19 years old at the time of the child's death. He actually passed away in 2009. Both the mother and father were in school at the time of the baby's death. This girl was killed by the last person anyone would suspect. On the 8th of March 2020, Brittany Ulaki shouted to her dad James, "I'll beat you home." Brittany had just been watching her dad play in a band and had organised a lift home with her best friend. The friend in question was 18-year-old Bryce Dickey. Brittany and Bryce were so close that she actually referred to him as her big brother. Brittany was 16 years old and Bryce was always there for her and her family. However, that day, far from beating her dad home, she would actually never turn up. Brittany and her family lived in Nevada. The area had a safe community feel and Brittany's dad trusted Bryce to get his daughter home safe. However, as time ticked on, James got really worried. He sent several texts to his daughter trying to see when she was due home. He also tried to call her but got no response. When investigators got involved, they interviewed 18-year-old Bryce. All they knew was he was the last reported person to have seen her. Now, at the time, he reported being equally concerned about her whereabouts. He told police that they'd driven round for 3.5 hours before he dropped her off at Spring Creek High School. He said that she told him she was meeting up with a new friend. Unfortunately, he didn't know who this was. He last saw her getting into a green pickup truck, and he reportedly saw a white tall male in a cowboy hat. He told police that he was so concerned he'd sent several Snapchat messages to Brittany, but she hadn't responded. Then on the 11th of March, a terrible discovery was made. Brittany's body was found. She'd been wrapped in tarpaulin, and there was evidence that she'd been AR'd before she was killed. Bryce expressed his sorrow on social media. He referred to her as sis and wrote, "We love you so much, just know that you won't ever be forgotten." Things started to unfold, however, when Bryce gave a DNA sample. Now, prior to this, Bryce had told police that his and Brittany's relationship was completely platonic. However, after the DNA sample, it was clear that Bryce had had sexual contact with Brittany. He then decided to change his story. He said that he had been physical with Brittany, but this was nothing to do with the murder. However, when police searched his house, they found blood-stained boots and he was arrested. It became clear that he had made up the story of the pickup truck and the male in the cowboy hat. At his trial, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and he got life. There is an alarming development in the world of true crime. So why is Ashton Kutcher's ex-girlfriend's murder back in the news? There has been some wild developments recently following Danny Masterson's sentencing for R charges. He's been given 30 years to life. However, controversially, Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis recently posted an apology video after it was leaked that they had both written letters of support for the S-offender. Now, a 22-year-old murder case involving Ashton Kutcher is under the microscope yet again. One of Danny Masterson's victims and his ex-partner, Chrissy Bixler, posted the following disturbing social media post directed at Ashton. It says, "Dear Ashton, I know the secrets your role model keeps for you, ones that would end you. Did you forget I was there? You were on speakerphone that night you called Danny on February the 21st, 2001. I heard everything, I heard the plan. In my opinion, you're just as sick as your mentor." Now, the date she refers to is the 21st of February, which is the day that Ashley Ellerin, his ex-girlfriend, was murdered. Now, her killer was actually convicted, so I doubt that she's insinuating that he had anything to do with the actual murder. However, she is insinuating that he's tried to cover something up, or there's something that he doesn't want to get out. Ashton actually testified in court in this case, and he claimed that he went to his ex's house to pick her up, looked through the window and saw what he thought was spilt red wine on the floor. It was actually Ashley Ellerin's blood. She had been murdered and was unalive in the property. He claimed that he left and went home, just presuming that she was angry with him for being late and that they would just see each other another day. If you want the full story, I did do a full video on it, so I've linked it below in the caption. This man left his teenage girlfriend to die in a park after shooting her days before her graduation. Giovanni Herrin was 19 years old and was dating 18-year-old Kareem Barreto Sabalza. A few weeks prior to the fateful incident, she'd actually sent texts to her friends stating that she was afraid of her boyfriend and fearing for her life. On June the 16th, 2018, in a plot to steal her car and money to buy substances, he lured her to a local park in Washington. There, he callously strangled her and shot her in the head. Horrifically, she was actually still alive and suffering when he fled the area, and she was found by a passerby. She passed away from her injuries and was just days away from graduating. She was expected to begin a nursing scholarship. Giovanni was arrested but ended up claiming that he felt sick on July the 4th. He was taken to hospital and used this as an opportunity to escape. He got in a taxi and injured the taxi driver, but luckily police hunted him down, shot him, and then brought him back to hospital. He's recently been sentenced to 37 years in prison.
Sing this little song. Run, rabbit, run, rabbit. Run, run, run.
A child allegedly shot his mum over a VR headset. An 11-year-old boy is due to stand trial for allegedly shooting his mum in the face for not allowing him to buy a VR headset. The boy was 10 years old at the time of the shooting on the 21st of November 2022 in Milwaukee. He remains unidentified to protect his identity, obviously due to his age. It's believed that the boy's mum refused to buy him a virtual reality headset off Amazon and he shot her in anger. It's alleged that he got the weapon that morning out of his mum's locked safe. She was shot in the eye and died. It's alleged that the boy then attempted to hide the gun and then told his big sister what had happened. She then obviously phoned police. Shockingly, the child is then believed to have logged into his mum's Amazon account the day after her death to buy the headset. It's believed that the boy had rage issues and he allegedly previously set the family home on fire. His grandmother claimed that the boy always reported hearing voices. Interestingly, cameras around the house had been unplugged prior to the incident. The now 11-year-old boy faces charges of first-degree reckless homicide.
One week at a time.
Did you know about the mysterious death of the actor who appeared in Lizzie McGuire? If, like me, you grew up as a Lizzie McGuire fan, you may not know about the mysterious death linked to the series. David Carradine was famous for being an actor, director, and a musician. He played over 200 roles in film and TV. He became quite well known for playing martial arts roles and appeared on one episode of Lizzie McGuire, helping her younger brother with a kung fu competition. The Carradine family seemed to have acting in their blood, as David's dad was famous actor John Carradine. His half-brother was Robert, who played Sam McGuire, who was Lizzie's dad in the series. Eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed the reference in the episode where Robert is asked who David is and he states he's like a brother to me. Now, rewinding to David's early life, he heartbreakingly attempted to end his life when he was just 5 years old. This was after he found out that one of his brothers was adopted. Thankfully though, he did not succeed and went on to have quite a successful career. During his life, David was in trouble with the law multiple times. He was arrested and prosecuted for several offences, and on one particular occasion he was found wandering around with no clothes on. He broke into a neighbour's house and smashed a window which cut his arm. He allegedly assaulted a woman and at a later stage he received a DUI. In May 2009, he was in Bangkok, Thailand to shoot his latest film, Stretch. He was last seen alive on June the 3rd. His assistant ended up not being able to get hold of him for the dinner plans that they had that evening, so the group left without him. David ended up calling his assistant back about an hour later, but the group had already gone, so David needed to make arrangements for himself. The following day, 72-year-old David was found deceased in his hotel room in Bangkok. He was found without clothes on and inside the wardrobe of his room. He was hanged from a curtain cord. There was apparently no signs of a struggle, however there was no note left and reportedly he had rope tied around other areas of his body. It is disputed as to whether this was a self-unaliving, some sort of S-act gone wrong, or murder. Thai authorities ended up doing the first autopsy and they said that the likely cause was asphyxiation for the death. They believed that this was done by himself to himself as part of an S-act. However, David's family then paid somebody else to do an independent autopsy. The medical examiner that they hired ended up concluding that in this case, the way that he had been tied up actually ruled out self-unaliving. This UK true crime case is absolutely disgusting. On the 11th of December 2017, emergency services were called to a house fire. It was just before 5 a.m. in Walkden, England. Firefighters battled to contain the horrific fire that engulfed the property. Time really was of the essence as there was an entire family trapped inside. Many would have presumed at the time that this was just a tragic accident. However, the truth of what happened is absolutely sickening. Inside the home was 37-year-old mother Michelle Pearson. Her children were also trapped, 8-year-old Brandon, 15-year-old Demi and 7-year-old Lacey and 3-year-old Leah. Despite the fire service's best efforts, the eldest 3 children passed away in the fire. The 3-year-old was rushed to hospital but tragically died 2 days later. Mum Michelle was rushed to hospital and had to receive extensive medical treatment for her horrific injuries. She remained in a coma and had to be kept in hospital until March 2019. She tragically died on the 25th of August 2019. The horrifying deaths were a result of these 3 individuals: Zach Bolland, David Worrell and Courtney Brierley. Terrifyingly, the trio had made homemade petrol devices in the kitchen of a nearby address. On the night in question, Courtney remained in the car while the two men smashed through the window of the victim's home. They then threw the devices inside the kitchen and the living room. Now, I have never heard of this happening before, but the fire spread so quickly and the heat was so intense that the smoke alarms melted before even having chance to alert the family. Zach and David were jailed for a combined total of 77 years. Courtney pleaded guilty to manslaughter and got just 12 years in jail. Is the cold case murder of an Arizona hiker finally solved? It was the 13th of June 1987. Early that morning, 23-year-old Kathy Sposito decided to go hiking. She lived in Arizona and decided to do the Thumb Butte Trail. However, during her hike, tragedy struck. Fellow hikers heard a blood-curdling scream. Running to try and help the woman, they found her body covered in blood and she was deceased. Sadly, there were very few leads in the case and the trail went cold. However, police believe they've found the likely culprit. Brian Bennett was 16 at the time of Kathy's murder. In April 1990, Brian was accused of SAing a woman on the same trail that Kathy died on. Strangely, it was the same time of day too. She'd been camping at the time with her boyfriend. The very same year, Brian is believed to have locked a girl in a room and SA'd her during a party. His crime spree didn't end there and he ended up attacking another victim in 1993. Brian SA'd the woman and he then threatened to kill her because she'd seen his face and he thought she would be able to identify him. 1 year later, Brian actually moved to Kentucky and died by unaliving himself. Although he's now deceased, police have revealed that Brian was likely Kathy's killer. DNA technology helped to identify him as the perpetrator, and police believe that he hit the young woman with a wrench and a rock on the fateful day. It's believed that he then shot her and stabbed her in the head in the brutal attack. Police wanted to be sure that they had got the right man, so they actually exhumed Brian's body. His DNA matched the wrench at the crime scene. Because of the fact that investigators did also find unidentified DNA on the weapon, they haven't officially closed the case. But with the advances in DNA technology, it's only a matter of time. Out of all of the kidnapping cases, this one absolutely shocked me. Mary Vincent ran away from home when she was 15. She was born in Vegas, but ran away to Sausalito in California with her boyfriend. The two didn't really have much of a plan and they ended up living in a car. Soon though, Mary was completely on her own when her boyfriend was arrested for R-ing a different teenager. In September 1978, she attempted to hitchhike to her granddad's house. He lived in Corona and it was due to be a huge 400-mile trip. She needed a reliable and helpful member of the public to help take her at least some of the way. That's when she came across a seemingly helpful older man called Lawrence Singleton. He pulled over and offered the young girl a lift. She accepted this, but it wouldn't be long before she would massively regret that decision. During the car journey, Lawrence put his hand on Mary's neck to apparently check whether she was well. Soon after this, she fell asleep. Now, when she woke, she was alarmed because she realised they were going in the opposite direction than she wanted. She realised something was wrong and there was actually a sharp stick in the car, so she used this to threaten Lawrence. He claimed this had just been a mistake and agreed to turn back around and go the right way. However, when they decided to pull over for a toilet break, things would take a very dark turn. Lawrence used this opportunity to strike Mary over the head and start to strangle her. He R-ed the teenager before tying her hands behind her back and driving on. When they came to a stop, he forced her to drink an unknown liquid and she begged for him to let her go. He callously said, "You want to be free? I'll set you free." What he did next was absolutely hideous. He took out a hatchet and sliced off both of the girl's arms. He stated, "Okay, now you're free." He fled the scene and essentially left her there to die. Incredibly though, Mary found some inner strength and managed to drag herself out of the canyon. Losing a lot of blood as she walked, she actually went 3 miles and held what was essentially left of her arms above her head to stop her losing too much blood. Luckily, after the 3-mile walk, a car did stop and took her immediately to hospital. She had life-saving surgery and was fitted with prosthetic arms. She obviously needed a huge amount of physio and counselling to cope with the both physical and mental trauma. Luckily, Mary was able to provide a massive amount of information to police about her attacker and he was soon arrested. Shockingly though, this story only gets worse. Although he was found guilty of armed kidnap and attempted murder, he served just 8 years in prison. Having left Mary to die, he was then let out of prison on good behaviour. This would prove to be a fatal decision, and he would go on to commit an even more hideous crime. On February the 19th, 1997, he was living in Florida and decided to lure an S-worker, Roxanne Hayes, into his house. After suddenly hearing blood-curdling screams, neighbours alerted authorities. However, when they arrived, it was too late. Roxanne's body lay on the floor. Lawrence had stabbed her to death. This time he was sentenced to death, but he actually ended up dying of cancer while on death row. Mary founded the Mary Vincent Foundation to help survivors of violent crimes. This criminal was caught after uploading his DNA to a family tree website. In 2007, the Gasparilla Pirate Festival was underway. Many University of Tampa students were in attendance, including one particular female who ended up walking alone back to her dorm. Unfortunately, a predator spotted her stumbling up the road and decided to strike. Trying to gain the female's trust, he offered to walk her home. She then called her boyfriend to keep them company on the walk back. However, as soon as they got to the dorm, the man attacked her. He SA'd her and then fled the scene. Unfortunately, police did collect DNA from the scene but couldn't find a match. Frustratingly, for years the case went cold. That is, until a 44-year-old man was curious about his family tree. Jared Vaughn submitted his own DNA to an online database and had no idea that he'd essentially just laid a gingerbread trail right to his door. Jared from West Virginia had no idea investigators were testing his sample against the DNA collected at the crime scene. It was a match and he was arrested. This is the terrifying mystery of the Virginia Tech murders. Heidi Childs and David Metzler were childhood sweethearts. They grew up in Virginia and met through a church youth group and were inseparable by the time that they were at Virginia Tech College. Heidi was 18, and on the 26th of August 2009, she was super excited for an appointment the following day with a careers advisor. On the day in question, David had planned something really nice for her. He planned to take her out on a date to a field in Jefferson National Forest. The plan was they were going to hang out and play some music while the sun set. The location he picked is a lovely spot, but the fields are quite secluded. The couple got there at around 8:15, and what happened next is not clear. The following day at 8 a.m, a dog walker found the couple's bodies. David was in the driver's seat of his car and there was glass all over the gravel by the door. He'd been shot. Heidi had also tragically been shot with a hunting rifle and was found outside of the car. Her bag, phone, ID, camera and lanyard were all missing. The first press conference revealed that DNA evidence had been collected, which was believed to be from the killer. There were also 6 cars identified that police were investigating further. However, tragically, this case has very much gone cold. Many believe that the couple may have stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen and were then killed to keep them quiet. Another theory is that a poacher may have accidentally shot David and then shot Heidi to cover this up. I recently actually covered the case of the back-to-school killer Jesse Matthew, who was actively killing during this period of time in this area. However, this case doesn't seem to match Jesse's typical MO or motive. Unfortunately, this case remains unsolved to this day. This case is absolutely sickening. This mother murdered 6 of her children by intentionally starting a house fire. It was the 7th of July 1992 and the fire service was called to a house fire in East Baltimore. They responded to the horrific scene and found the bodies of 4 children in the inferno. 2 children who had been rushed to hospital eventually died from their injuries. The children's mother, Tonya Lucas, was apparently due to be evicted from the house that morning. Witnesses testified that she bought and used a huge amount of the substance CC prior to the blaze. She'd also been undertaking S work in order to afford the substance. It was clear that her one child, Gregory Cook, who was only 2 years old, was a victim of abuse leading up to the fire due to him apparently resembling a skeleton. The medical examiner determined that the children's deaths were due to smoke inhalation. They were all determined to be homicides. A witness actually testified that Tonya had told him she was going to set her house on fire because of the pending eviction. She apparently was under the impression that a charity would provide her with a house if her house was to go up in flames. A witness watched the mother squirt some liquid in the lounge and callously start the fire. Now, some believe that Tonya is innocent, however, she has recently admitted to these crimes. She's had several trials relating to this case and served 23 years in prison. Her previous conviction was overturned on a technicality and 2 trials ended in hung juries. She has now accepted a plea deal on 1 count of arson and 6 counts of murder. She's been resentenced to life in prison, taking into account the time that she's already served, and has now been placed on probation. A 10-year-old vanished while out hunting with his granddad, and what has happened is shocking. Wyatt Eves Nibbert from West Virginia had gone out squirrel hunting with his granddad on the 9th of September. Wyatt and his granddad were apparently eating lunch, and Wyatt said he was going off to look for some squirrels. His granddad apparently remained where he was and tidied up. He then called out for the boy, and apparently Wyatt never came. The granddad couldn't find him, and then an hour after the boy had gone missing, police responded to a vehicle accident involving the granddad. Tragically, the boy was found dead days after this. He was found deceased with a single gunshot wound. Police have not yet stated whether they suspect foul play. This true crime case will make your blood boil. Over a decade ago, 19-year-old Kara Nichols vanished. The teenager was born and raised in Colorado Springs and unfortunately had begun using substances throughout high school. She was reported missing on the 14th of October 2012. At this point, her roommates hadn't heard from her for 5 days. Police soon learned that she'd actually spoken to her brother on the phone on the 9th of October at around 11:45 p.m. She told him that she was on her way to a modelling shoot. The next day, unsettlingly, her phone was going straight to answer phone. It was actually her brother that ended up travelling to her apartment to figure out what was going on. He spoke to her roommates and the alarm was raised. Now, Kara's laptop was actually still at her apartment, which was concerning because if she just decided to up and left, she wouldn't have left her laptop behind. When investigators started digging into the case, they found that Kara had been placing ads as an S-worker. Interestingly, she'd actually posted an ad with her phone number on it the same day she went missing. Police also found out that her phone had been used on that day too at almost midnight. Investigators started looking into exactly which numbers she'd received calls from and set about contacting the individuals. They got a return call of Joel Hollendorfer. He admitted to police that yes, he had spoke to the girl about S services, but they'd never ended up meeting. However, when police tracked Kara's phone, her last activity was in the area of Joel's parents' house. Police ended up searching the property with a cadaver dog. Disturbingly, the dog barked in loads of different areas on the property to indicate remains. However, the owner of the property stated that this must be just because they have a lot of animals and over the years the animals die and then they bury them in the back garden. The police were happy with this explanation and gave up on the search. They also, though, decided to interview Joel's wife, who strangely declined to cooperate with the investigation. Frustratingly, Kara's case went cold. On February the 8th, 2022, a decade after she went missing, police confirmed that they had found Kara's body. It was on that property they'd searched the whole time. Joel was obviously arrested. In February 2022, his wife decided to come clean to police. She told them that Joel had told her in 2014 that he accidentally killed an escort that he'd hired. He admitted that he accidentally strangled her to death and buried her near a dead horse on the property. Joel's defence in court claimed that he accidentally killed her in an S-act gone wrong and that she lost consciousness due to substance use. Shockingly, he was only convicted of manslaughter and got just 24 years in prison. This was a huge blow to Kara's family. There's been a huge breakthrough in a hideous unsolved murder case. Virginia woman Robin Lawrence was 37 years old. She was tragically found stabbed to death in her home in Springfield on the 20th of November 94. Her husband had actually been out of town at the time of the killing and had been concerned when he couldn't get hold of his wife. He asked a friend to check in on her and what the friend found was sickening. Not only was Robin deceased inside the property, but her 2-year-old daughter had been there the whole time. She was by this point severely dehydrated, having been left alone with nothing but her mum's body for days. Police were able to collect DNA from the crime scene, but unfortunately when they ran it through their systems, they didn't get a match. However, we now have a massive breakthrough. It's obviously been decades since the horrific murder, but now a man may be finally brought to justice. Due to advancements in DNA technology, a familial DNA match was found. Police then discovered that Stefan Smirk, aged 51, was working in the area of the murder at the time. Police worked with a DNA technology company to create a composite image and compared it to photos of what Stefan looked like at the time. Upon arresting him, police claim that they got a confession. He's now been charged with second-degree murder. Police arrived to this murder scene to find a 5-year-old waving a loaded weapon. Adam Simji and his girlfriend Michaela Paulus really enjoyed hiking. In August 2022, the couple had embarked on a road trip through Alabama. They wanted to make the most of the time that they had together prior to starting classes at Florida Uni. As they were driving through the Talladega National Forest, they came across a woman at the side of the road. She seemed to be after their help. The woman in question was 21-year-old Yasmin Haider. She had apparently broken down not far away and asked the pair to help her. They followed her to the car and then out of the blue she pulled a gun out. She told them to empty their pockets and follow her into the woods. Adam actually told her that all of their valuables were in the van and she was welcome to take them. He then also pulled his gun out and the pair opened fire. Yasmin shot him in the abdomen and killed him. Yasmin was also shot 4 times. Michaela grabbed her phone and called emergency services. She also attempted CPR on her boyfriend. She was desperately trying to stop the blood flow coming from the wound. Shockingly, when police turned up to the crime scene, they found a 5-year-old boy with a loaded weapon. The child was Yasmin's son. Luckily, the child put the weapon down and Yasmin and an accomplice, Crystal Pinkins, were arrested. The child was obviously taken away by authorities. Yasmin received 35 years in prison and Crystal is yet to have her trial. Please be warned that this true crime case is incredibly disturbing. This man killed his son after his son found his horrifying selfies. You'll feel physically sick by what this man photographed. It was 2012 and Mark Redwine was living in picturesque Colorado. Mark had been divorced twice and had 2 kids with his ex-wife Elaine. The pair were in a custody battle over 13-year-old Dylan Redwine. Dylan had actually expressed to his brother Corey that he felt uncomfortable visiting his dad. It would later be revealed the likely reason for this. Some horrifying images that the brothers found in 2011. On the 18th of November, Mark picked Dylan up from the airport. Dylan had finally agreed to go on a trip to visit his dad. CCTV from the airport showed that the pair were barely interacting. Via text, Dylan agreed that the next day he would go to his friend's house. He was due to arrive there about 6:30 a.m. the next day. His last text was that night at 9:37 p.m. However, Dylan never showed up at his friend's house. His friend sent Dylan a text message at 6:46 a.m. seeing where he was. Unfortunately, he would never get a reply. Mark would later claim that Dylan had left the house and never returned. A huge search of the local area began. Now, within days of the disappearance, one of Mark's ex-wives told police something interesting. Disturbingly, he told her that if he ever had to get rid of a body, he would dispose of it in the mountains. He also apparently said to her that he would kill the kids before he let her have them. Mark was actually interviewed on TV and asked about his ex-wife's allegations against him. He appeared very suspicious to viewers and was talking about Dylan in the past tense. A whole 7 months passed until Dylan's body was tragically found. He was found only around 8 miles from Mark's house, just off an ATV trail. A witness actually came forward and said that they had seen Mark driving alone in the area in April 2013. Mark was very familiar with that area and actually owned an ATV himself. Mark and Dylan's mum also appeared on the Dr. Phil show. Basically, the episode was just them throwing allegations at each other. Interestingly, Mark failed to do a lie detector test. Then a telling discovery was made. In August 2013, police found Dylan's blood and human cadaver smell in Mark's lounge. A cadaver dog also indicated that human remains were present in the washing machine, on Mark's clothes, and in Mark's vehicle. Mark was arrested for second-degree murder and child abuse. So what were these disgusting photographs that the boys had found? The pair had discovered photos of Mark dressed in women's underwear consuming feces out of a nappy. I obviously cannot show these images on TikTok for obvious reasons, but you can find them on Google, but just be very prepared for disgusting images. Dylan and his dad's relationship had been gradually declining, and Dylan had actually asked his brother to send him the images so that Dylan could confront his dad. He had no idea that doing so would be fatal. The prosecution stated that this had triggered rage in Mark. He then killed his own son in the lounge of his house. He was eventually sentenced to 48 years in prison. This teenager killed his sister over the Wi-Fi password. Kevon Watkins from Georgia was just 16 years old when he turned his family's lives upside down forever. On February the 2nd, 2018, an argument broke out in his home. There had been an issue with the Wi-Fi connection and Kevon was not happy. He wanted to play video games but was unable to because the connection kept dropping. In a bid to attempt to stop the other members of his family also using the internet, he decided to change the Wi-Fi password. He felt that this would be a good way to resolve the issues he was having. However, him and his mum got into a heated debate over the issue, which could have been easily resolved. Tragically, the argument would end in death. Kevon had an older sister, Alexis, and she decided to step in between the pair. However, this decision would prove fatal. Kevon and Alexis ended up in a physical fight and police were called. Kevon got his sister in a chokehold where he incapacitated her for 15 minutes until police arrived. Kevon only released the grip that he had over Alexis when a police officer commanded that he do so. She was tragically pronounced dead from asphyxiation. When she was killed, she actually had a young son and a fiancé. Kevon was sentenced to life in prison. This is an incredibly disturbing true crime update from New York. A 1-year-old child has been killed and 3 other children remain in hospital after substance paraphernalia was found at a nursery in the Bronx. The New York Police Department received a call on the 15th of September regarding 3 unconscious children. 4 children that were in the care of the staff at the Divino Nino daycare appeared to have come into contact with a substance that led to hospitalization of 3 of the children. We know that disturbingly 1 child was dead on arrival, and the cause of death is believed to be a direct result of the interaction with the substance. Police stated all 3 children were unresponsive and demonstrating symptoms of O exposure. A life-saving substance was administered to all 3 of these children in an attempt to save their lives. The children in hospital are thought to be an 8-month-old girl, a 1-year-old boy and a 2-year-old boy. Following the 911 call, the police inspected the nursery. Disturbingly, they found a kilo press. Now, if you aren't aware, this is an item that is commonly used by substance dealers when packing large quantities of substances.